In one of the previous sections of Wife of Bath's Prologue, we have learnt about that incident of domestic violence that occurred between Jenkin, the fifth husband of Wife of Bath, and herself. And she has disclosed that it was because she had tore a few pages from Jenkin's book that triggered this domestic violence, this violent behavior from Jenkin. And in just the previous section, before this, we have also learned about that particular book, which is called here Jenkin's Book of Wicked Wives. And we have we have seen some parts of the book where Wife of Bath says that it was like a collection of various texts. It was like an anthology where there was texts from Saint Jerome's and Theophrastus, who were the major anti-women writers of that age. And Wife of Bath said that she battles for sexuality, she battles for marriage and pleasure, while they value chastity more, which that is the dichotomy with which this Wife of Bath's prologue began. Now, this section, which is called Jenkin Reads About the Vices of Women, it's kind of a continuation of that previous section where Jenkin was reading his anthology, which he had much pleasure in reading. And in this section, Wife of Bath actually delves into a few instances of that text, Jenkin's Book of Wicked Wives. And Wife of Bath tries to argue that this is why it was so unbearable for me, and this is why I had tore some pages from this book. Now, we'll go on to this section and we will see that Wife of Bath resumes her story from the previous section, where she was telling about this particular book. And this book becomes very important because it has a kind of a collection of sources, an anthology of sources, which Chaucer used in his writings. So when Wife of Bath resumes the story about that fifth husband, Jenkin, and she tells us why she tore 3 pages from Jenkin's Book of Wicked Wives, and this is why that incident of violence had occurred, that Jenkin hit on her, hit her and making her deaf in one ear. Now let's move on to the text and we will see these instances one by one. And these individual instances is very important because they are also the literary sources of Chaucer. But now to tell you, as I started to, why I was beaten for a book, Pardew. So Wife of Bath kind of recaps and continues from that point. She now reveals this lengthy catalogue of wicked wives, and these are some major examples that she remembers from that book. We have to remember that Jenkin too, the fifth husband of Wife of Bath, Jenkin too is now gone. Jenkin is now dead. So Wife of Bath kind of recollects Jenkin's memory, and with that recollection, she also recollects how Jenkin used to say all these, used to bring up all these wicked wives as a part of his regular enterprise. Upon a night, Jenkin, who was a sire, read in his book as he sat by fire. So one night, now Wife of Bath resumes her story to the other pilgrims, and he says, one night Jenkin, who was our sire, who was my husband, he starts reading a book, and this book is the Book of Wicked Wives. And one by one, she goes on about this catalogue, these different examples of wicked wives, as said by Jenkin. Of Mother Eve, who by her wickedness first brought mankind to all his wretchedness, for which Lord Jesus Christ himself was slain, who with his heart's blood saved us thus again. Lo, here expressly of woman may you find that woman was the ruin of mankind. So The first example is that of Eve, the biblical story of Eve from Adam and Eve. We all know this story. Uh, when Eve tasted the fruit of the forbidden tree, and which was registered as man's first disobedience, and for which man was driven out of Eden, which is the paradise, and he was man and woman, they were thrown into this world of suffering. So, and till Jesus Christ, who was the Son of God, he was sent by God and he died on the cross for our sins, and our redemption was bought with his holy blood, with Christ's holy blood. So this is the story, the central story of Bible, and everyone knows kind of this story. This matter was also used later, much later after Chaucer, by John Milton for his Paradise Lost. So this disobedience was caused by Eve, because it was Eve who was tempted to taste the fruit of the forbidden tree. Although God had specifically asked them not to taste that fruit of the forbidden tree, that the tree of knowledge, but Eve did. She couldn't control her temptation, and for Eve, man was. It was registered as first disobedience to God, and man was thrown into this earth, into this world of suffering. So the moral of the story comes down to that a woman was responsible for the fall of mankind. And in all these story, it starts with Eve, who was considered to be the first woman. And we are all children of Adam and Eve according to that story of Bible. So Eve was responsible for the fall of mankind. So this is the moral of the story. And in all subsequent story, we have these tales where a woman is at fault, in some kind of fault. So the first story is of Eve, and it is registered that Eve, the woman, was responsible for the fall of mankind. Then he read out how Samson lost his hairs, sleeping his leman, cut them with her shears, and through this treason lost he either eye. So this is also a story from the Bible, from the Old Testament, book of Judges to be very specific. The story of Samson betrayed by his wife. So Samson was a Nazarite man. Nazarite and Philistines, they were opposite forces, enemies of each other. So Samson was a Nazarite man of tremendous strength. He was a Nazarite hero. But only problem with Samson was that he married twice, and both times he married women from both times he married a Philistine women, and even this time he was betrayed by his Philistine wife. Samson's strength was concentrated on his hair. It was believed that all the powers that Samson had resided on his hair, and whoever cuts his hair, if Samson's hair is cut, he will lose all his strength. Now, this Philistine wife of Samson, she betrays him and cuts his hair when Samson is sleeping. And this makes Samson weak, and later he was caught by the Philistines, who blinded him and enslaved him. So this again comes down to a story of a wife who deceives her husband and caused his blindness and ultimate tragic death. And this again was later one of the stories that was used by John Milton for his epic Samson Agonistes. But that is much later when Chaucer is writing. So this originally is a story from the Old Testament, and this also, like the previous, where Eve was at fault. Samson's wife, perhaps her name was Delilah, she deceives Samson, and this again comes down to a story of a woman who deceives her husband and ultimately caused his death. Then he read out, if I am not to lie, of Hercules and Diana desire that caused him to go set himself on fire. Now, Hercules is the Greek legend, and his wife was Deianira or Deianira. So, in Greek legend, Deianira, who was Hercules' wife, she gave him this poisoned shirt. Was kind of poisoned with some kind of love uh, potion or something like that, so that when Hercules wears this dress, he doesn't abandon her, he always remembers her. So Hercules wears it, and this poison starts burning him, and this pain becomes so unbearable that Hercules ultimately sets himself on fire, and he dies a tragic death. So this again becomes a woman's fault. The wife's desires not to be abandoned leads to the husband's death. So, like Eve, like Samson's wife Delilah, and Deianira, Hercules' wife, again, a woman is at fault, and it leads to some fatal calamity for the husband, for the man. Nothing escaped him of the pain and woe. This is the fourth one. Nothing escaped him of the pain and woe that Socrates had with his spouses too. How Xanthippe threw piss upon his head, this hapless man sat still, as he were dead. He wiped his head, no more durst he complain, than ere the thunder ceases comes the rain. So Socrates, as we know, he is the Greek philosopher, and it is believed that his life was disrupted by some marriage troubles. So Xanthippe or Xanthippe, whoever, is the name of Socrates, is one of the wife of Socrates, and when she was really angry with Socrates, she threw piss on his head, and this helpless philosopher Socrates could only sit there without complaint, nothing much to do. And he concluded this episode by saying that here the thunder ceases comes the rain. So there has to be rain before the thunder stops. So the rain is actually the piss which his wife throws on his head, and the thunder here represents his wife's ultimate rage. So here again in this fourth story, we have a husband who is mistreated by his wife. We have a wicked woman who is this Xanthippe, who in her rage threw piss on Socrates' head. The next story is of Pasiphae, the queen of Crete. For cursedness, he thought the story sweet. Fie, say no more, it is an awful thing, of her so horrible lust and love liking. So, Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, or the queen of Crete, this also is a part of the Greek mythology. Pasiphae is the queen of Crete. She experienced extreme lust, and she mated with a white bull who was sent by Poseidon. And after mating with this white bull, she gave birth to a creature called the Minotaur, and this creature was part bull and part man. So this again was a story of a wicked woman, in this case Pasiphae, the queen of Crete. Women with lust was stereotyped as being grotesque. It is really bestial, is a part of bestiality, like having mated with a bull, having mated with an animal, experiencing the extremes of lust. So here again another story of a wicked wife, which Jenkin loved to read. The next one is of Clytemnestra, for her lechery, who caused her husband's death by treachery. So this again is from Greek mythology. Clytemnestra, Clytemnestra was the wife of Agamemnon, who was another hero of the Battle of Troy. Now Clytemnestra, along with her lover, Now Agamemnon was gone for several years in the war of Troy, in the Trojan War, while Clytemnestra, she took a lover while staying back. Now when Agamemnon returned from the Trojan War, Clytemnestra, his wife, and along with her lover, this illegitimate lover, they murdered Agamemnon. They stabbed him to death when he was taking a bath after returning from this battle of Troy. So here again we have another wicked wife, a women cheating on their husbands with their lovers and also kind of killing them. He read all this with greatest zest, I vow. So Jenkin, the fifth husband, Jenkin the clerk, wife of Bath's fifth husband, he read all these accounts of wicked wife with great enthusiasm. He just loved it, loved to read all these. It was as if his favorite leisure. Whenever he had this opportunity, he read this one book, the book of wicked wives, and he derived some kind of pleasure reading this accounts. Now, we have to understand that this book was the source of his bitter misogyny that he carried within himself. And we have to understand how popular literature of Chaucer's times, of medieval times, popular literature propagated this misogyny. And in this case, it also highlighted these evil women in some way, and these incidents where a woman was at fault, at some kind of fault, and this was done intentionally to generate this atmosphere of hatred against women. So we have to understand how popular literature, popular culture in medieval times also propagated this misogyny, helped this misogyny to be propagated in the society and among men who read it. He told me too when it was and how Amphiaraus at Thebes lost his life. My husband had a legend of his wife, Eriphyle, who for a brooch of gold in secrecy to hostile Greeks had told, whereat her husband had his hiding place, for which he found at Thebes but sorry grace. So this source is taken, this character Amphiaraus is taken from Aeschylus's play Seven Against Thebes. This is also a play probably in the Greek times. Amphiaraus was a seer, and he saw his own death if he was to accompany Polynicles to this war called the Siege of Thebes. So Amphiaraus, because he knew that he would die if he accompanies Polynicles to the siege of Thebes, he hid when he came to fetch him for the war. When Polynicles came looking for Amphiaraus for the war, he hid himself in a hiding place. And unfortunately, his wife, who was called Eriphyle, she showed Polynicles her husband's hiding place in return for a gold necklace. And Amphiaraus was found, and he had to go to the war. And like he had foreseen, he was blown off and killed in the war. So this again contributes to that catalogue of wicked wives. Here we have a woman who sold her husband for a golden necklace, for wealth, for possession. Of Livia and Lucia told he me, for both of them their husbands killed, you see. For the one for love, the other killed for hate. Livia, her husband, on an evening late, made drink some poison, for she was his foe. Lucia, lecherous, loved her husband so, that to the end he'd always of her think. She gave him such a philter for love drink, that he was dead or ever it was morrow. As husbands thus by same means came to sorrow. So Jenkin again reads about these two wives, Livia and Lucia, two women who killed their husbands. One killed their husband for hate, The other killed her husband for love. Now, Livia killed her husband out of hate, because she saw her husband as a foe, uh, and as her enemy. She gave her husband a poison drink, and her husband was dead. So Livia killed her husband out of hate. But Lucia, she was considered as lecherous, and she was always in this insecurity that her husband will be attracted to other women. So now Lucia gives her husband a love potion. She is so much in love with her husband, that she gives him this love potion, so that he won't be attracted to other women. But this love potion ultimately kills him the next day. So then this again comes down to a more kind of the moral of the story, that a woman's hate as well as her love, her extreme love, might be fatal for men. So Lucia and Livia are also included in this catalogue of wicked wives. Then did he tell how one Latumius complained unto his comrade Arius that in his garden grew a baleful tree, whereon he said his wives, and they were three, had hanged themselves for wretchedness and woe. O brother, Arius said, and did they so? Give me a graft of that same blessed tree, and in my garden planted it shall be. So this is again a random story about two friends, Latumius and Arius. So this Latumius complained to his friend Arius how in his garden, Latumius's garden, an evil tree was growing, and there was an evil tree on which he has seen three of his wives. Now Latumius had three wives, and he has seen all three of his wives hang themselves to death on from this tree. Now, on hearing this story about that wicked tree, Arius says, "O brother, give me a seed of this blessed tree so that I shall plant it in my garden." So, what Arius means is that if there is this tree planting which one can get rid of their wives die, because Latumius had success three times. Three of his wives are dead by from hanging from this tree. Arius means that if this is the case, if by planting this tree I can get rid of my wife, so I should call this tree a blessed tree. So in place of being shocked by that incident of three of Latumius's wives hanging themselves, he asks for a seed of this tree so that he can get rid of his own wife, perhaps. So this is, of course, a joke. It is a joke on women, a wife joke, which is popular then, which is popular now. That stereotypes women. We still have jokes which propagates misogyny, humor, jokes, and wife jokes and women jokes, which propagate this sense of misogyny. And even now, even till today, and this is why Chaucer becomes so relevant, humor is often generated at the cost of women. Humor is generated at the cost of some women. Humor is generated at the cost of some stereotypes of women, by denigrating them, by stereotyping them. So this was common in Chaucer's times, in medieval times, and this book of Wicked Wives also had these misogynist jokes of wives of later date. He also read. Now, beside these references from Greek mythology, the stories of Bible, other stories from scholars like Saint Jerome's, Theophrastus, and other anti-women writers, Jenkin also read more recent stories about wicked wives. Now we have to understand that this book also covered contemporary events that occurred probably in Chaucer's own time. Now, these events are selected and highlighted in this book to portray women as evil. That is the sole purpose of this book. And even recent incidents which can prove that women are actually so evil are also included in this book. And what is important is that this book, and like many other narrative, is completely oblivious to men's crimes. And this is one of the things that wife of Bath already raised her voice against, that all this, they were women in medieval times, they were living in a man's world where their follies, their shortcomings will be highlighted, and their evil will be highlighted, where and this whole history of men's crimes and whole history of oppression will be subsided, and women's crimes will be highlighted to portray them as evil, to portray them as vain. So this is how men controlled the narrative. It was a very systematic control, and a systematic oppression that happened in the medieval times. And then Jenkin, wife of Bath, lists this whole thing, what Jenkin said. How some had slain their husbands in their bed and let their lovers shag them all through the night, while corpses lay upon the floor upright, and some had driven nails into the brain, while husbands slept and in such wise were slain, and some had given them poison in their drink. So, wife of Bath lists this whole catalogue of wicked women, wicked wives murdering their husbands, wives sleeping with their illegitimate lovers all night while their husbands' corpses lay on the floor, wives killing their husbands by driving a nail in their head while they are asleep, wives poisoning the drinks of their husbands. So this whole catalogue of women who commits crime against their husbands. Jenkin kind of reads this whole thing every day. It was as if his greatest pleasure to read from this book. He told more evil than the mind can think, and therewithal he knew of more proverbs than in this world there grows of grass or herbs. Now Jenkin told more evil stories about women every day than one can even imagine, and wife of Bath kind of exaggerates and says that he knew more of these misogynist proverbs and these evil stories about women than there is grass in this world. And we understand that these accounts, various accounts of scholars, anti-women scholars, accounts of Greek mythology, accounts from the Bible, other sources, accounts of recent events, accounts from other literary works, all these collected together to make this misogynist volume, which Jenkin calls the Book of Wicked Wives. And these were the sources of Jenkin's misogyny, and in extension, these were the sources why the society, Chaucer's own medieval society, was misogynist in overtone, in character. These were the sources, and these were feeding the misogyny that existed in society every other day. And then this section ends with some of Jenkin's rants against women, which wife of Bath records and recollects. Better, he said, your habitation be with lion, wild, or dragon fowl, said he, than with a woman who will nag and chide. So this is how Jenkin insulted women. He said that it is better to live with a lion or a beast, a wild lion or a beast, than to live with a nagging woman. He also said, better, he said, on the housetop abide than with a brawling wife down in the house. So it is better to live on the roof of the house than to live with an angry, brawling wife down below. So these are popular rants, popular jokes against women, like husbands running out of their houses because their wives are angry. All these jokes on women and wives, such are so wicked and contrarious, they hate the thing their husband loves for aye. So wives are so wicked and argumentative that they will always hate what their husbands love. All these things Jenkin had said to insult women, insult wives. He said a woman throws her shame away when she throws off her smock. Jenkins said that women throws off their shame when they take off their clothes. Very below the belt comments and very misogynistic comments, these rants and insults that Jenkins loved to do to women. A woman fair, save she be chaste also, is like a ring of gold in a sow's nose. So this is very low mindset of Jenkin. He said that a pretty woman, unless she is a virgin, it's like a gold ring on a pig's nose. So these are many insults, repeated insults that Jenkin used to do to wife of Bath, and she's trying to recollect these as a justification why she tore off these pages from that cursed book. Who would imagine or who would suppose what grief and pain were in this heart of mine? So wife of Bath says, can you imagine how awful were these words, how it pained and grieved my heart? So it obviously pained and grieved wife of Bath, because we also have to remember that after the first 4 marriages which wife of Bath had done exclusively for wealth and money with her scheme, the fifth marriage was kind of different. Jenkin, she had married out of love. We also have to remember that through this whole prologue, through this whole account of wife of Bath, she never mentions the names of the first 4 husbands, but she mentions the name of Jenkin, and she keeps a separate section exclusively for Jenkin, and she treats him differently because Jenkin was a person she had loved. Now, this marriage turning out to be this disaster and Jenkin turning out to be this violent misogynist man is some kind of a tragedy, really, for wife of Bath, because she expected, after all that trouble she had gone through in her whole life, at least this fifth marriage would work out. But it looks like it doesn't really work out very well, because Jenkin was this violent misogynist man. And so Jenkin used to say this lengthy catalogue of wicked wives, wives who betrayed, wives who murdered, humiliated their husbands. And wife of Bath was fed up listening to all these, and Jenkin was reading these to her and lecturing her on these wicked wives and how wicked women were in general every other day. So wife of Bath was really fed up of all these. What's important, what comes out of this section is it becomes a discourse on the medieval anti-feminist tradition, and we have this list of whole catalogue of wicked wives, and we understand that this anti-feminist discourse that was there in the medieval age, it was built on misogyny, and it existed in all sections of the society. Especially Jenkin was an educated man. He was a clerk who had studied in Oxford. So by making Jenkin as a character this misogynistic, Chaucer tells us that this anti-feminist discourse, which was built on misogyny, had sewed down to all the sections of the society. And it was very difficult for women in general to exist in that society. So this is this section. We have almost come to this end, to the end of this rather long prologue. It will end in a couple of more lecture perhaps. So till then, till the next time.